Much like many people within the political and technocratic landscape, we see that Mark Zuckerberg has once again proven himself to be nothing more than a shrewd operator at best. And I would argue that in many ways he should not be trusted, but we don't need to focus on all of those here today. What we're going to tap into is the nature of why it is that we're seeing the dynamic shift within how it is that he's espousing content moderation on his platforms through his company Meta. Both on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook, we will be seeing the dynamic shift when it comes to how content is moderated. And why might that be? Well, it's because there's a new sun on the horizon, and it's that of the orange man beaming down the hills, and Mark Zuckerberg very much does not want to get fried when the heat truly strikes down. The thing that I think is most remarkable about all of this is that the man who said that Facebook wasn't going to be suppressing free speech is now announcing that Facebook will not be suppressing free speech. Truly remarkable when you think about it, but what I absolutely adore about this the most would be how it is that he's tackling this, claiming that we will no longer be outright censoring content and we will not be having fact checkers. Of course, these fact checkers themselves were actually government subsidiaries and organizations that were contracted out through effectively hollowed out CIA cutout organizations, so the government was the one censoring information on platforms that Meta controlled. But now you see, Mark Zuckerberg just doesn't want anything to do with that because he cares about free speech. Yeah, I'm certain of it. So now let's go ahead, jump in, and see what we've got with the evolution of Mark Zuckerberg and how it is that he's now tackling things like content moderation as he has abandoned the fact-checking ethos in pursuit of something more akin to what Elon Musk has unfurled for Twitter with that of community notes. Here we see from the Telegraph, Facebook dumps fact-checkers in attempt to restore free speech. Mark Zuckerberg says moderators too politically biased as he pledges a system similar to X. Forgive me if I don't take Mark Zuckerberg, the android's word at face value, especially when I can just look back upon history and see how it is that he's operated in the past within the political landscape, and I can realize that all he's done is lick his finger, stick it in the air, and figure out which way the wind is blowing. Here we see from the New York Post, Mark Zuckerberg spent $419 million on nonprofits ahead of the 2020 election and got out the dim vote. During the 2020 election, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg spent hundreds of millions of dollars to turn out likely Democratic voters, but this wasn't traditional political spending. He funded a targeted private takeover of government election operations by nominally nonpartisan but demonstrably ideological nonprofit organizations. Analysis conducted by our team demonstrates this money significantly increased Joe Biden's vote margin in key swing states, in places like Georgia, where Biden won by 12,000 votes, and Arizona, where he won by 10,000. The spending likely put him over the top. This unprecedented merger of public election offices with private resources and personnel is an acute threat to our republic and should be the focus of electoral reform efforts moving forward. The 2020 election wasn't stolen. It was likely bought by one of the world's wealthiest and most powerful men pouring his money through legal loopholes. And personally, I was never in the camp that the election was stolen. I was more so in the mindset that it was fortified. But my goodness, the establishment can't help but boast the actions that they took when it comes to the fact of the extra legal measures that they were able to go ahead and, let's say, throw into the forefront so that Donald Trump and the people who were that of his base that were going to be voting for him had to grapple with. Because here we see from this article from Time Magazine, the secret history of the shadow campaign that saved the 2020 election. It goes into detail about things like how people like Mark Zuckerberg were influential in things such as this. Quite fascinating, that. But the thing that I find most fascinating specifically is how now that we've seen this subtle shift from Mark Zuckerberg, the media class, specifically the apparatchiks within that of the mainstream organizations like CNN that are nothing more than hollow brainlets that don't actually have a thought rattling off between their ears, people like Brian Stelter, you see, they've immediately started to turn their crosshairs now upon who? Someone like Mark Zuckerberg, of course, because you see, just now that he's decided to just slightly step away from the narrative and not be in steadfast allegiance with the nonsense that is being peddled by the regime, that has opened up the conversation for someone like Mark Zuckerberg to now be the enemy in the eyes of the corporate press once again, as we saw he once was after the election of Donald Trump, when him and all of these other bigwig tech heads were hauled in front of Congress and they were effectively having their feet held out to the fire and roasted endlessly by that of the people within the United States government, effectively asking them, how is it that you could have allowed this to happen, this extremism that led to the rise of the election of Donald Trump? utterly insane, but that is exactly what the media class is. So now let's go ahead and throw it into them and you can hear their nonsense.
It gets to this broader sense that when people like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg talk about free speech, everybody wants free speech, but it oftentimes seems that these tech CEOs actually are favoring or preferring a certain kind of speech, right? They're favoring their own speech or their own political preferences and not the actual entire user or the community's speech. You know, the changes announced by Meta today are very much a MAGA makeover, a pro-Trump makeover, and that's going to win Meta some conservative users, but it may repel some liberals. That's the same thing we've seen happen on Elon Musk's X. He's turned it into more of a right-wing platform where he's pro-free speech when it's really pro-Musk or pro-Trump speech.
All right, Brian Stelter, thanks as always. And you mentioned those changes over at Meta. That is going to be fascinating to watch moving forward because obviously Facebook and Instagram, places like that, have also been accused of being super spreaders of disinformation, misinformation. We'll keep our eyes on that.
I truly think it's quite revealing that we see Brian Stelter coming forward and stating that, well, if you change up the content moderation and you don't have this extreme censorship of information that is true, then what you're going to do is alienate liberals. I don't think that's the case. I'm sure some people will be that are so caught within the narrative trap that they have no capacity to escape, and the only thing that they see are effectively shadows cast on the wall in Plato's cave, and thus these are the things that they freak out about eternally, which, when you hear the ridiculous things that some of these people actually worry about in the political landscape, it does seem like that is very much the case. But alas, nonetheless, we see this is exactly what someone like Brian Stelter thinks of his viewers. He does not think they are capable of dealing with real and factual information, and nonetheless, he doesn't even want them to, because that means they very well may deviate from the narrative that he is trying to sell them, because he is not someone here to deliver them the truth. So now let's go ahead and throw it into this clip of Mark Zuckerberg openly stating what he plans to do with content moderation in the future going forward.
Hey everyone. I want to talk about something important today, because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram. I started building social media to give people a voice. I gave a speech at Georgetown 5 years ago about the importance of protecting free expression, and I still believe this today. But a lot has happened over the last several years. There's been widespread debate about potential harms from online content. Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political.
Gotta pause already for just a moment. Marky Mark, my boy, you're claiming free expression is the focus, but you've been cracking down on anyone that expressed anything outside the spectrum of allowable opinion. You claim that this is government censorship gone awry, and that that's a bad thing and that governments shouldn't censor things, but at the same time, openly stating that yes, this is very clearly politically biased. Meanwhile, being the person that was quite literally the hammer smacking down on people, as this entire time you knew that this was something that was politically biased, government censorship was bad, and it was cracking down on freedom of expression, but you didn't care because you were doing the bidding of the regime, and now that you've seen the cultural shift, you were trying to make sure that you can get ahead of it before you get run over and steamrolled as you so rightfully fucking deserve. Now let's go ahead and throw it back into this android.
But there's also a lot of legitimately bad stuff out there. Drugs, terrorism, child exploitation. These are things that we take very seriously, and I want to make sure that we handle responsibly. So we built a lot of complex systems to moderate content. But the problem with complex systems is they make mistakes. Even if they accidentally censor just 1% of posts, that's millions of people. And we've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes similar to X, starting in the US. After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US. So over the next couple of months, we're going to phase in a more comprehensive community notes system. Second, we're going to simplify our content policies and get rid of a bunch of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are just out of touch with mainstream discourse.
We got to give credit where credit's due, because Mark Zuckerberg, absolutely correct when he talks about the fact of focusing on things like child exploitation, domestic abuse, the threats of possible terrorism. These are important topics, but of course what we need to realize is that all of these different people, the actual man hours that were used in real time to censor people who were defying the narrative of what was being espoused, whether it be around the COVID era, the 2020 election, the fact of what was going on with the Syrian gas attacks, and I could go on and on and on. But nonetheless, what we realize is that there has been constant censorship from Facebook, even before that of the hyper-politicization of what we saw social media turn into, and all of this realistically started after Donald Trump tweeted his way to the presidency, when all of these social media heads, as I stated, were then hauled in front of Congress and grilled relentlessly about the fact of how they let this happen. It's truly unbelievable, but the thing that we do need to address is that because they were grilled so fervently, the censorship arm of social media then cracked down heavily. And what is it that Mark Zuckerberg addresses there? Well, if that censorship affects only 1% of posts, that's millions of people being censored. And that's a big thing to pay attention to, because as we know, the censorship industrial complex ended up going awry, censoring way too many people, making a litany of mistakes because the bureaucratic nature of the actual system itself got far too big to control, and that alone is one of the things that led to the downfall of Facebook and the proliferation of an institution like X, because Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter, turning it now into the platform that it is, a free speech platform. Well, free speech, that is. Let's be honest, there's plenty of issues with how Elon Musk has been operating as of late. At this point, he may as well have just bought the actual website itself to act like the people he bought it from, with how he has been treating many of the different people that have been questioning his approach on the H-1B visa conversation. I have a video on this. Go ahead and watch it. The thing is that I do want to go ahead and focus on specifically, though, is that he claims that fact checkers destroyed trust. And that's why we're going to be going ahead and shifting to the community notes standard. And this is the one big thing that I wish Mark Zuckerberg would address, but of course he won't, because it would openly show his culpability and the nature of how it is that he is nothing more than a performative puppet in so many different ways. Because when he claims that the fact checkers destroyed trust, he doesn't talk about the fact that these Facebook fact checkers were also in conjunction with that of the United States government and the intel services, and many of the people that were doing the bidding of the government were that of government employees working within places like Facebook and their subsidiary companies that were doing this fact checking.
What started as a movement to be more inclusive has increasingly been used to shut down opinions and shut out people with different ideas, and it's gone too far. So I want to make sure that people can share their beliefs and experiences on our platforms. Third, we're changing how we enforce our policies to reduce the mistakes that account for the vast majority of censorship on our platforms. We used to have filters that scanned for any policy violation. Now, we're going to focus those filters on tackling illegal and high-severity violations. And for lower severity violations, we're going to rely on someone reporting an issue before we take action. The problem is that the filters make mistakes, and they take down a lot of content that they shouldn't. So by dialing them back, we're going to dramatically reduce the amount of censorship on our platforms. We're also going to tune our content filters to require much higher confidence before taking down content. The reality is that this is a trade-off. It means we're going to catch less bad stuff, but we'll also reduce the number of innocent people's posts and accounts that we accidentally take down. Fourth, we're bringing back civic content. For a while, the community asked to see less politics because it was making people stressed. So we stopped recommending these posts. But it feels like we're in a new era now, and we're starting to get feedback that people want to see this content again.
We're going to start allowing civic content once again, says Mark Zuckerberg. And what does this say subversively? What is the implicit point that is behind this statement? That we were censoring your political speech previously, and on the basis of, well, it was upsetting people, you see. By chance, When you're saying it's upsetting people, is it because there are certain posts that people don't like that are simply getting mass reported, and that is the justification you're using? Because we know that's exactly what's happening, but of course, you're not going to address this. You're just claiming that we're going to open up the grounds to civic content once again, because it seems that the discourse is changing, and this is very much something that people want within the public conversation. But very clearly, based on the fact of how many people that you were having to censor on your website, this was something that people wanted to have a conversation about long ago, but you were dropping the hammer down upon them and making sure that they had no ability to openly speak their minds in what is now the public square, because in the digital age, social media is undoubtedly that. Take it away, Mark.
So we're going to start phasing this back into Facebook, Instagram, and Threads while working to keep the communities friendly and positive. Fifth, we're going to move our trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California, and our US-based content review is going to be based in Texas. As we work to promote free expression, I think that it will help us build trust to do this work in places where there is less concern about the bias of our teams. Finally, we're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more. The US has the strongest constitutional protections for free expression in the world. Europe has an ever-increasing number of laws institutionalizing censorship and making it difficult to build anything innovative there. Latin American countries have secret courts that can order companies to quietly take things down. China has censored our apps from even working in the country. The only way that we can push back on this global trend is with the support of the US government. And that's why it's been so difficult over the past 4 years when even the US government has pushed for censorship.
Thank you for finally openly stating the point out loud that the US government was pushing for censorship and openly admitting that you were acquiescing to it and being nothing more than a tool for the censorship industrial complex. Something people have been lambasting you for on repeat, which you in turn would say that was felonious nonsense and would completely reject their claims or avoid the people making them outright. I will admit I am grateful to see Mark Zuckerberg coming to the forefront and openly stating what is going on behind the scenes. It is important that we have people such as this with a level of prominence as he does openly speaking about things like this. It can't just be one person. It can't just be two people. It has to be a litany of individuals with wide-scale influence that can truly make change, that see the fact of how the culture is turning, thus they realize if they do not get their ship in shape, they will be sunk like the Titanic and be banished to the annals of history. And if they do not change, the annals of history is undoubtedly where Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Meta as a whole would undoubtedly belong.
By going after us and other American companies, it has emboldened other governments to go even further. But now we have the opportunity to restore free expression, and I am excited to take it. It'll take time to get this right, and these are complex systems. They're never going to be perfect. There's also a lot of illegal stuff that we still need to work very hard to remove. But the bottom line is that after years of having our content moderation work focus primarily on removing content, it is time to focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our systems, and getting back to our roots about giving people voice. I'm looking forward to this next chapter. Stay good out there, and more to come soon.
And there you have the 180-degree pivot from Mark Zuckerberg as to what he has been pushing for the past 8 years on his platforms. It's truly a remarkable thing to see, but what it reminds me of specifically is what we saw when Jack Dorsey was no longer the face of Twitter and he was free to operate as he desired, going around to Bitcoin conferences, talking about things like crypto, talking about the process of free access to information removed from censorship, the desire to have a social media network created on the blockchain, free from the ability for the government to have any control over what you say and how you operate, or the government having any control over your financials. This was a major shift that we saw come out of Jack Dorsey, and now that we see the weight being lifted off of Mark Zuckerberg, we hear him talking about how he's excited for the next chapter. And when you listen to Mark Zuckerberg talk about Facebook in its initial creation, which has been co-opted by the intel services, don't get me wrong. It was all about bringing people together so they could have conversations, opening up the world to dialogue so that we could make sure the world became a more noble and dutiful place by bringing humanity together. While that is the end goal, we see that this very well may have been something that was exploited by the Machiavellian tricksters within that of the establishment, making people like that of Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, and so many others who have these noble goals as nothing more than pawns on the chessboard of life as they move them along to whatever point they desire. I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Thank you for watching if you got this far. Thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. Tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great, and most importantly, my friends, please go tell someone you love them. Peace out.